Visions of Yzerman by Zachary Cullen. Chapter 4, Red Kelly. The northernmost houses of Millwood, the houses across the street from mine, backed up to a larger expanse of woods. Those woods encompassed Tonquish Creek and the Rouge River, connecting to Hines Park via a multi-vanous trail system, but we knew them simply as the Big Woods. A natural flood basin, the River Rouge flowed between canyon-like 30 to 50-foot mud embankments, varying in degrees of incline, measuring about 2 to 4 feet deep and the width of a 2-lane highway in most places. The more meager Tonquish Creek, which emptied into the Rouge at a geographical point about 100 yards due north of Millwood, took its name from an Indian chief who was well known to us Millwood boys from a young age. Not far from our neighborhood, along a strip of woods between the Holiday Park condominium complex and Wayne Road, a Michigan historical marker demarcated the area where Chief Tonquish had been killed at the hands of pioneers. It read, "Chief Tonquish and his son are buried nearby. Chief Tonquish led a band of Potawatomi Indians in this area in the early 19th century. In 1819, a series of clashes between these Indians and pioneers culminated in the death of a white man. Angry settlers pursued the Indians along the Rouge River to the point where it branches into what is now known as Tonquish Creek. This event reflected many of the tensions and conflicts between Indians and settlers over such matters as food and territory, which occurred during the westward movement of America. In those early pioneering days, before they rubber-stamped a boilerplate suburban name on it, they called my hometown Nankin Mill Township, a nod to the Nankin Mill grist mill just beyond the Big Woods, on the north side of the Rouge River. White pioneers purportedly built the mill at the spot where the tribes of the Three Fires, which had included Chief Tonquish's Potawatomi tribe, held sacred tribal meetings. In the early 20th century, Henry Ford purchased the grist mill and repurposed it as a factory cog in his vast automobile empire. It functioned until 1948, when it was donated to Wayne County Parks and repurposed as an historical site, recreation area, and nature center. In later years, Jason Miller, the youngest of the 3 Miller boys with whom we played backyard football and street hockey, told a story about how he had encountered the burial site of Chief Tonquish, a gravestone marked by a giant black X in the woods. Although Jason notoriously spun tall tales, it became sort of a suburban legend. We spent several summers searching the Big Woods for that rumored gravestone and that black X, mapping out the trails we had traveled and the branches of the river we had explored, hiking for up to several miles on a single day. Finding it became one of the unofficial objectives of the club. Under the lime green canopy of those gigantic maples and oaks, with all varieties of greenery, sapling pines, ferns, bramble, berry, and thorn bushes, roots, and vines, along the detritus, we hiked alongside that River Rouge, either on the main trail that wound its way atop its south bank, or, on warmer days, in the shallow creek beds, hopping from one sand bed to another, usually to the Blue Bridge, the Nankin Mill, to the haunted barn and beyond, sometimes even to Frankie's house, 2 miles down the river. Though we were warned specifically that you'd grow an extra arm if you swam in it, a major dumping site for the automobile industry, the Rouge is one of the most polluted rivers in Michigan. We frequently touched the dirt brown water, catching crayfish and snapping turtles, floating popsicle stick rafts, and washing our hands of clay in the stream. Summer after summer we searched, and although we never did find the rumored gravesite of Chief Tonquish, the spirit of the brave young Potawatomi chief ever hung in the realm over our play, enchanting our adventures in a spirit of wonder and awe. Through the winter of 1994-1995, at least, the big woods were still largely off-limits to us, without an adult chaperone. That was less due to any sort of strict parental rule imposed upon us than our own prepubescent fear, yet to be reckoned with. As such, it was a big occasion any time Mom or Mrs. Feidler walked us through the big woods to the Nankin Mill recreation area to picnic and play on the swing sets in summer and to sled the hill in winter, and even more so when Dad or Mr. Feidler took Steve and I there to ice skate. For many years, every December, the big red fire engines descended upon Nankin Mill, where they flooded the basin beneath the hill with the long rubber fire hoses. The city erected floodlights and placed metal trash cans at both ends for pickup hockey and open skating, with wood benches and picnic tables placed alongside either side of the rink. When frozen over, the rink and the nearby sledding hill attracted crowds of people. Moms and kids, would-be ballerinas, necking high school couples, middle school punks, and beer league hockey all-stars alike, all of them bundled up in scarves and hats against the elements. Between there and the local indoor rink, Steve and I learned to skate that winter of 94-95. One morning that January, we woke up to find the neighborhood covered in a foot of snow and the houses drooping with icicles, a midwinter snowstorm having come and gone like a cat burglar overnight. I wonder if the schools will be closed today. My father surreptitiously wondered while Patrick and I stared out the sliding glass back door, awestruck, still in our pajamas and huddled up around the heat vent. Looks like we got at least 6 inches overnight, he mused. The juniper shrubs out back bowed under the heavy weight of the snow. United by the common dream of a snow day, Patrick and I raced to the living room television set and, apparently, did not rustle each other for the remote control. We watched the ticker across the bottom of the Channel 7 morning news anxiously, hanging on the names of each passing school closing, and I prayed silently to God, listing off the things I was willing to give up if he made the name St. Michael's School appear. When it did finally appear, one of the very last schools listed, we were so incredulous that we had to watch through the whole cycle of school closings again, just to double check. But sure enough, there it was, Livonia Public Schools and St. Michael's Catholic School, which meant both St. Michael's and Nankin Mill were closed for the day. We celebrated accordingly by climbing into our snowsuits and heading out into the snow-covered front yards, where Patrick and I met Steve and the rest of the Millwood gang for a celebratory romp in the snowplow banks. For an hour or so, we dug out igloos and sculpted snowball war turrets. Then, our cheeks glowing red from the cold, we hung our snowsuits, hats, and scarves to dry in the laundry room. We warmed up with a cup of hot chocolate while Mom made grilled cheese sandwiches for an early lunch. I was sitting at the dining room table afterward, working on a drawing in my art pad when the telephone rang. Mom answered. "It's Steve," she called over, I rushed to the kitchen to take the phone. "Do you want to go ice skating at Nankin Mill with me and my dad?" he asked. "Mom, can I go ice skating with Steve and Mr. Fiedler?" I pleaded. "She says I can go," I confided. "Okay, be ready in half an hour in front of your house," Steve announced, parroting his dad's instructions. But before he hung up, I heard his mother yelling at Steve to "come here this minute." More than an hour later, the doorbell finally rang. Steve waited for me in the doorway while Mom tied my boots one last time. Then I stepped onto the porch with my wood Christian hockey stick and my skates tied over my shoulder. We waved goodbye to my mom as we stepped carefully down the icy driveway and into the street, where Mr. Fiedler was waiting for us, leaning on his wooden hockey stick. He had a thick black mustache and wore a green and white MSU winter hat, his eyes hidden behind mirror lens ski goggles. Behind him, the trees in the big woods had been stripped of their white covering of frost by afternoon winds, and the branches danced like voodoo dolls in the gusts. Following Mr. Fiedler, we stomped across the snowy pavement to the end of the street, where the trailhead to the big woods started. "Stevie," Mr. Fiedler hollered from ahead, stopping at the edge of the woods to get our attention. "Step in my boot prints," he yelled, cupping his hands around his mouth and shouting over a deafening gust of wind and snow. He made a giant stomping motion in the snow, trying to demonstrate his instructions to us. Steve and I gave him thumbs up as best we could with our mittens, then followed his footprints into the woods, the dirt trail completely hidden underneath the virgin snow. We hiked north through the snow until we reached the Rouge River, which was calm, lifeless, and nearly frozen across, then followed the river to the Blue Bridge. Looking down the embankment to the river, the woods looked strange and unfamiliar to me in the whitewash of a recent snowstorm. Nothing was left but brown stubs of trees and jagged branches contrasted against white snow and a backdrop of steel-gray sky, so that the woods looked almost entirely colorless. The summer birds all gone south for warmer climates, the woodland critters all slumbering in hibernation somewhere. The only sounds were the crunching noises of our boots in the snow and the howling of the wind. It was a ghastly kind of silence, the way the woods get in midwinter. At the Blue Bridge, Steve and I customarily stopped to lean over the railing and look down into the mud-brown water. We hawked our throats and spit as far as we could off the bridge, watching our twin saliva specks freeze before they hit the water and then dissolved. 50-some feet ahead, Mr. Fiedler had already arrived at the clearing that led up to the sledding hill and Nankin Mill in the distance, the place where Henry Ford once built auto parts for the Ford factories. Beneath the hill, the ice rink sat in a sort of flood basin, dug out with snow embankments surrounding it in a loop. About a dozen people skated, while a few more looked on from surrounding benches, rubbing their gloved hands together for warmth. Others tobogganed down the nearby hill. Mr. Fiedler was sitting at a picnic table at rink's edge, lacing his black skates, when we finally caught up to him. Steve and I sat down beside each other, our breath visible in the frosty air, and he helped us remove our boots and pull on our skates. While he tightened the laces on my skates, I watched the small groups of people skating and twirling on the ice, their shouts and laughs echoing throughout the clearing. Behind a row of pine trees, a trash can fire burned in the parking lot, and the smoke, drifting upwards above the pines, smelled of campfire and cedar. The lights of the ice rink glowed golden from above, making the surface and depths of the ice look cold blue. Despite the 1994-95 NHL lockout, which washed out the NHL season through January, Steve and I were getting more and more into hockey that winter. Not only did we learn to skate, our dads rotated taking turns taking us to the local rink and the outdoor rink, but we actually went to our first hockey game, a Detroit Vipers IHL game at the Palace of Auburn Hills. Steve and I both loved watching the team enter the ice through a giant inflatable viper mouth that hissed steam and smoke, rock music blaring from the speakers. Playing in their inaugural season, the Vipers received a wave of local interest amidst the NHL lockout that season, which helped them break IHL attendance records at nearly 17,000 per game. Mr. Fiedler's former college roommate, John Allers, served as the radio voice of the Vipers and later the Anaheim Ducks, and frequently offered us free tickets to games that first season and over the next several years. We met him after the games and gladly accepted souvenir Vipers hats, pucks, mini sticks, and hockey cards. In that sense, Steve and I probably imagined ourselves Vipers stars as much as we did Red Wings, preparing to step onto the ice. Our laces meticulously tied and tightened, we finally stepped onto the ice with our sticks, wobbling at first to find our balance, then walking slowly on the ice. Side by side we skated, clumsily at first, until we glided somewhat fluidly against the hard winter wind, gawking at Mr. Fiedler. He surely skated as fast as Sergei Fedorov. By the time Steve and I completed our first lap, he had passed us several times. We completed a couple laps and even mock roughhoused at one end, but not without struggle. Steve and I decided to take a break, and we moved in the direction of the benches. The next thing I remembered was a flash, a collision with an older boy, the butt of his stick up against my face, and then a wipeout, then staring up at the coal smoke sky through a lens of purple, my head heavy and cold against the hard ice, the scarlet blood from above my eye dripping down onto it, rich red against the blue veins of the ice. Later that evening, 6 stitches sewn up above my left eye, I held an ice pack over my bandage at the kitchen table while Dad watched the Red Wings game in the living room. He tended to a crackling fire in the fireplace, in between gulps of his Labatt's, and I listened woozily to the broadcasters discussing roster scratches and injury reports. Number 19, Dad announced suddenly during the pregame skate-around. That's Steve Yzerman. He's the heart of the team. There was no light in the living room save for the blue glow of the ice through the television and the red-gold blaze of the fire. Dad always liked to watch the games in relative darkness. I got up from the kitchen table and stepped down into the living room, hesitant. Dad patted his hand on the plaid couch cushion next to him, waving me over. "Come sit down," he motioned casually. "And number 91, he explained to me further, pointing in the direction of the television to the player with blonde, flowing hair, helmetless. That's Fedorov. He's from Russia, and he can score some pretty goals. During stoppages of play and commercial breaks, Dad got up to grab another beer and a root beer for me and threw fresh logs into the fireplace. The snaps of embers, the cracks of wood, and the low tones of Mickey Redmond's incredulous voice composed the soundtrack to those winter evenings. Outside the living room window, a fresh dusting of snow fell on the juniper shrubs in the backyards. More than once, Dad told me he was going to the garage and left me alone to watch the Red Wings by myself for several minutes at a time. Wings announcers Dave Strader and Mickey Redmond filled in the blanks for me. Number 25, Dad interjected towards the end of the game. That's Darren McCarty. He's a tough guy. He's been itching to fight someone all game. Minutes later, almost on cue, McCarty got into a scrap along the boards. McCarty drops the gloves. We gotta fight, gang, Mickey Redmond announced greedily on the television set. Dad and I both jumped to our feet instinctively. And like that, Detroit sports were passed down from generation to generation on those cold, dark, two-dog nights of winter. I think of those Michigan winter nights and that 1994-95 Red Wings season every time I look into the mirror, the scar above my left eye reminding me that the past is real.